Good morning, good afternoon, good night. We got, different scenarios, different times because we have people seeing us, watching us from Europe, watching us from South America, and we got people in Central America, of course. Welcome to this podcast from Service United channel. As you know now, Service United is integrated with the rest of the ecosystem from Service United, and we're speaking now more about Surf City, the beach, El Sonte, people like our guest today, um, Wayne Gregori, who has a friend that's working very hard at El Sonte. He will soon introduce himself. And we're going to speak about technology, a little bit about technology. He's a technology guy. He's a very creative guy. And you're going to love this podcast. As always, please give us your opinions. Give us your if you can donate to this channel, which has no compromise to any political ideology or any other, attachment to anyone, just to ourselves and our ideas about freedom, about generating creative stuff, and all, as I said, all these issues that have been happening in El Sonte and around Surf City. Welcome, Wayne.
Thank you, Ernesto. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor for us. Okay.
Thank you.
Uh, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes so you can introduce yourself, and then we're going to speak about El Sonte and what you're doing with your this little farm that you have in El Sonte. I think it's a very
Okay.
interesting point that everybody should know. And then we're
Yeah.
going to speak about San Francisco Network. We have here a famous guy. You can search for him, Wayne Gregori. He's all over Wikipedia and everything. He's a tough guy. He's a tough guy. Okay. Wayne, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Wayne Gregori. I grew up in Oakland, California, and then got married and moved to San Francisco. Um, I was a self-taught technologist, right? I was the kid who rode motorcycles and built cars, and my dad's family was into automobile racing, and that for a young boy, me and my brother, was intoxicating. And so we got sucked in and gladly into the car world because at that time, let's call it in the 70s. Oh, actually, yeah, in the 70s. The technology of the day was cars, and cars had been the technology of the day for 40 years, or more. And so technology really kind of passed through the automobile industry as it went to other areas. So knowing how to work on cars and knowing how to do it well, there was some prestige in that. And my dad's family were very good at it. They built race cars, all the way up to sprint cars, which are crazy fast machines. And so my brother and I intended to do that, but ultimately, my dad's cousin was killed in a sprint car accident. My mother put her foot down, and we were no longer on that track to get in that car. And so I kind of turned my life. I saw at the time computers were just starting, and I wasn't from a wealthy family, and I was looking for a leg up in the business community. And so I was interested in learning about computers. So that, from that moment till when I actually did it was some years, but it started then, as I kind of looked to where I might go in the business community and how I might, create an edge for myself. And so, the story is I went to Europe with on a Eurail pass with a friend, and my eyes were opened to a world of just more educated people, educated in the classical sense, and I felt somewhat cheated in my education, and I only cheated myself because I was so involved in the car thing that I never really spent the necessary time to kind of achieve that kind of education in high school. And so, in case I came home, I went to college. I really I simply decided that I needed to make up for lost time. And so when I went into college, I studied and I just applied myself. I decided I wanted to learn a foreign language, and so I learned how to speak French. That was kind of a lifelong endeavor that I carried through my life. as a married man as well, keeping it up. But I ultimately kind of got involved in computers. Yeah, when I got married, I was a produce broker, which was a fun job. You're buying and selling vegetables, but ultimately, I just wanted, yeah, I didn't want the standard path. And so I ended up getting a job selling software. I learned how to start noodling around with computers. I won't call it programming, but batch programming, making things work. And ultimately, when telecommunications just started happening with computers, the idea that you could buy a modem and then connect through phone lines, computers, this was fascinating to me, and I saw it as the future in a certain respect and wanted to learn about it. And this was the path that kind of got me going onto, what SFNet became. So yeah, that's kind of the brief of kind of how I kind of made that segue into technology.
I remember that you were spoken about this tool on the book. In Spanish, it's called esmeril, or you can call it also a pulidora. Uh, so they were working with car, and it was very dangerous, he said. And that you try to pull it up and on your dad's garage, and you almost
Yeah.
got killed. It's very
Yeah.
you can amputate the hand without if I understood you well, and if it's a pulidora, you can amputate
Yeah.
one of your members of your at
Oh my
no
gosh.
cost.
I got to tell you, Ernesto, as the tool industry has evolved, it has become a tool industry for home improvements. The weekend warrior and the poliadora, the grinder that you buy in your local hardware store, is a powerful tool. But it's nothing like the poliadoras they use to build skyscrapers and boats. And these tools, there were no weekend warriors buying poliadoras when I was a kid because these machines weren't simply something you would use around the house. So they were incredibly powerful, because, and the durability, these things were meant to last for years, right? But the thing that was so fascinating as a kid is that the mark or the logo was a Sioux warrior, an Indian, with the headdress and the red face, and it was right, on this machine. And as a kid who always played, Cowboys and Indians, my brother and I were only a year apart, there was this folklore about Indians, about the warrior. And when my dad used this thing, it was a wickedly powerful tool. Today tools, when you hit the switch for them to go on, they wind up slowly so the torque doesn't, immediately happen and kind of wrench it from your hands. But back then, no such thing. When you hit that on button, it went to 10,000 RPMs immediately. And a grown man would have to hold it tightly. A 4-year-old kid, was yeah, there was just no way that was going to stay in my hands. And yeah, and so anyway, when I did that, and it just jumped out of my hands like a wild animal, and luckily it didn't touch me and hit the ground. But yeah, it was just a moment I wanted to explain in the book because my dad was a severe man, like so many fathers back then. I don't want to, paint my dad with that brush, but dads were authoritarian. You listened to your dad. You didn't ask your dad more than once.
No democracy back then.
No, no, you asked your dad for a Coke and he said no. You didn't ask again. It's like, I told you, I said no. What do you can't hear me? So anyway, when my dad, he came flying out of the kitchen down the stairs and he picked me up and, held me to the sun and just started looking all over my body to see if that thing had touched me. And when he found out I was okay and I was sobbing, and I just told him I broke it, Dad. And he looked at it and he goes, we can fix that, and he goes, let's go have lunch. And this is like, for me, this idea that, you fix your messes and you move forward. It wasn't a failure. It was, yeah, it was a mistake and we're going to fix it. We're going to go forward. My dad was, the Italians and men were like that. This is the way, the world was, for men. And it's changed, well, dramatically in the States. Not so much in El Salvador. I mean, things are changing here, of course, too. But this idea of the way a man treats a son is It's more, traditional, what we see in El Salvador, which is healthy. It's healthy for kids.
I was searching for this specific word before I got you on the podcast. It's in Spanish, inquieto, and in English, it's restless. Uh, you and I are restless people. I
Yeah.
have been a creative guy like yourself since I was a kid and put myself in danger as yourself. So I don't believe in coincidences. So why life brought us together. And we're going to explore what you're doing now because you said you were doing some citrics and everything in a project that you have at El Sonte. So would you
Yeah.
please explain our audience what you're doing? What are you doing at El Sonte?
Well, listen, this thing I created, SFNet, that became so popular, it aggregated and collected a very special group of people. It was a community that was electric with excitement and ideas and humor. And and as time moved forward, it turns out that yeah, it looks like it was the first social network, and that was a nice kind of recognition that a friend of mine brought it to my attention. Because I had tried to write this book two times or three times prior. It's hard writing a book about yourself without sounding like a uh, obnoxious or self congratulatory person. And I didn't want that to happen. But in any case, this German guy, I was explaining SFNet to an Uber driver in Argentina. And when we got out of that car, the German guy looked at me. He goes, "Man, you started the first social network." He goes, "You need to own that." And when he said that to me, Ernesto, I knew how I was going to write that book. I knew at that point it wasn't a book about me. It was really a book about kind of it was a book about the guy who would have thought to create something to bring people into his life, right? So it wasn't this congratulatory book, but it was a roadmap of kind of how I was raised, right? And what kind of crazy kid would think he could do this, as an adult. And so taking from there, going to El Zonte, I came down here because I wanted to be here when the Bitcoin law went into effect because I saw it as a historic moment for humanity, and so I just wanted to be here on September 7th, I think, 2021. And I spent 2 weeks here, and I just had a great time because I had a great time. Because the Bitcoiners who had come, and there weren't many, but we were a handful of people, were just the kind of people that SFNet attracted. These are people whose neurons are just moving a little faster. They're looking for things and they're figuring it out, right? And I remember talking to my daughter, my oldest daughter, and she said, "Dad, I haven't seen you so happy in so long. You were just so energized down there." And I go, "I was because we were just talking about everything. And it wasn't just Bitcoin, right? It was the world, and Bitcoin gets, woven into all these scenarios. But when I decided to buy a property here, and I wasn't interested in buying just a house so I could, go to the beach. I wasn't interested in buying a property that was big enough to create a community, to attract a community. Let's say that. And so this property is only 1 mile from the beach, El Zonte. And it's 65 acres, and it's right on the river. The house I'm living at, this farmhouse is it was built by a military man. It's a colonial style. It's just a beautiful little house, and we've kind of renovated it and fixing the barn. The whole idea here is to have a farm that is integrally connected to the housing community that will be up on the hill because most of this property is a hill, is like a mountain essentially. So the property line starts at the river and it goes to the top of the mountain. And so, people, we could sell property here easily, regardless, right? Whether it was connected to a farm or not. But my goal is to create a housing environment that has purpose, and that is, you can come here and go to your beautiful home up on the hill, but just 2 minutes, from your home, you come down to the farm where we're growing oranges and and grapefruit and pangos manares. We have beehives and we have goats and we have some chickens with eggs and pollo for meat. And so it's like and it's not just for kids, I mean adults like that too. I mean people like to see things work. I mean it's kind of like just to plug in momentarily and come down to the farm. We'll have a place down by the river where you have a cup of coffee, spend some time with friends. So, there was a book I read years ago called The Third Place. And this was when I was doing SFNet. Some British journalist bought it for me. And it was, not your home and it wasn't work. It was this place where you'd go and you were the whole person. You could not be at either of those places, because you're playing a role at home and you're at work, you're doing a role. But in the third place, you're just you, and you have friends, and you unwind there, and so in case I see Rancho Satoshi, that's what we call it, is that third place. And so in any case, so yeah, we're just at the beginning. We own the property. We're finishing up the farm here. And probably next year we'll do the engineering that will be necessary to cut roads in the mountains, so we'll understand kind of how many lots we'll sell and all that kind of technical stuff.
Community is a magic word. I grew up with that in mind, and that was my context. Uh, we in El Salvador, and I think in Central America, we never got bored when we were kids, and we were teenagers. We were in the middle of a war, so we never got bored either. There was this intense emotions everywhere, and we grew up with this intense emotions and with the feeling about community. Community. Of surfers is what created Surf City now, and all those things that you're watching now. I think I already told you at the 80s, this small group of youngsters, kids, 14, 15, 16, they used to go surfing. I was part of them. I never could have finished my surfing lessons. I wasn't in about the surfing issue, but they were all my friends. So I went to the beach, and my dad, they used to say, "Dad, don't go to the beach at 4 o'clock in the morning. What are you doing? We're in the middle of a war. You might on your mind, and you're gonna get killed, and everybody's gonna get killed. So what are you
Mm.
doing?" And these people, they just kept surfing and kept surfing, and they believed in El Salvador. They created this community. So I
Yeah.
grew up in this community. They used to call them los vagos. They were all vagos. What do you want to go with those vagos? They're not doing anything. They're crazy. They're going to the beach in the middle of a war.
Right.
So you're gonna get killed. So, but I believe in this word, community. And now it's a huge marketing issue, building communities, finding Gilmore and experiences. But as I said, we had experiences since I was born, and we never got bored. We had experiences. We can even export them in this country. We had huge emotions and everything, but one of them is to connect one with each other. Whenever we can connect with people and we can, express ourselves and be ourselves, and we can be part of something that is give us a purpose and make us big in spirit and mind and in capacities. I think that's a great experience. And on behalf of El
We had
Salvador,
that too, Ernesto.
I thank you because you're doing a great thing with the people at El Sonte.
Well, I've
Believe
got
me,
my
I'm
fingers
not doing
crossed.
anything
We'll get it
to
done.
please you, or as you said, I don't want you to feel bad. I do it sincerely. I thank you. You're doing a good
Thank you. It's
job
very kind of
there,
you.
and um, welcome
Well,
again.
as you spoke of community here in El Salvador, it's certainly much different than it was up in the States. But we had community back when I was a kid, your neighborhood kids. And, back then there were a lot of kids and we were our own community. And, we got into trouble and, we did stuff we probably shouldn't have. But this is how you learn. I mean, no one learned, you learn more from your mistakes than you learn from anything, as long as you do learn, right? And, I was always, my dad was Italian, my mom Portuguese. They, they were second generation, but still, the Now, this idea that you didn't want to disappoint your parents, it was so it was so innate in our family because they spent so much time with us, right? And it wasn't the same with other families, And but in any case, we never really got into trouble like some of the kids got into trouble. But we had our share. But it's different today, There's just there are fewer kids in the United States. It's so expensive to have kids. So, you have these kids that are doted over their parents, and it's it's detrimental to a child not to allow them to explore. My daughter, she's got a 1 year, a 1.5 year old now. She's pregnant. When the kid was just Mateo, and he was just, I don't know, 6 months, I gave her some money and I said, buy the kid a helmet and just, let him walk. It's like, and she thought I was kidding. And I go, I'm not kidding. I go, you're concerned about him falling and hitting his head? Well, that's a good concern. But let him fall, let him get back up. This is how we learn, and this is how a boy learns to be resilient, and it's like these things get lost in these societies who just want to yeah, want to nurture. You can nurture a boy to death. Maybe not a girl, but a boy, you certainly can. Where, you can't, he's no longer going to be a boy or turn into a man. But anyway, but yeah, so yeah, I'm one of those people who continues to yeah, to promote that kind of traditional kind of upbringing,
There's another magic word here that is very useful for this podcast: technology. You just said about it has changed everybody's life. We grew up on bicycles. We broke our legs and arms, and we stood up and we cried a little bit. But then again, our parents said, "Okay, this is life. Go ahead. You're gonna fail sometimes, but you have to go ahead. Always, never give up, and go ahead." That's why we are in these projects, as you mentioned it before. But let's get to technology and let's get to San Francisco Net. This is very
Okay.
special because, as you said, this is about connection. I remember that part of the book whenever you said you were working for the first time with this connections, and that you got some communication with another guy that was in San Francisco too. And you said another word today. You said cheating. Yeah, I was cheating, and my wife was there with my little kid, and was just a couple of inches away from me, and I was speaking with this guy, or I don't remember if he said, "Are you a guy or a girl?" And do you remember that part of the book?
Oh my God. Ernesto, I tell you, that was the moment that I knew I had to do something in this as a business in this way, right? And so, it was late at night. We had just had, my daughter was probably 6 months old, and I had just remodeled the kitchen in our San Francisco apartment. We owned 3 units with this other person, and we were fortunate enough to be able to buy something like that. It sounds almost kooky today. No one could do that, but we did. It wasn't like it was an insane amount of money back then. Today it is. It was expensive for what we bought, and people thought we were crazy because we bought this rundown 3-unit building that people, our friends who lived in across the bay in Oakland thought we were just lunatics. But so I remodeled the kitchen. I'm in this beautiful kitchen. The rain is just pounding on the back of the house where I was, right? And so when I just bought this modem, and I probably owned it for a few months. And so, one night a week or a couple of nights a week, when at a time I would log into bulletin board systems. There were two computer magazines that came out every other week. Kind of and so one was Computer Currents, the other was Micro. What was it called? Anyway, two of them. And each of them had a directory of bulletin board systems. And these were young people who would just, take their parents' phone line, at 9 o'clock at night and plug it into their computer and promote that phone number in these books. And they would, they would do little art projects, and you would have software you could download. There were, oh, you could go and, ask questions of people about certain issues. It was just a way for young boys to experiment with the tech and do some programming too, because you could, most of these bulletin board systems were kind of, they don't call them open source back then, but they were freeware and you could change them, right? And so in any case, I was doing this and I was looking for a business. I was 30, 31, and I wasn't interested in downloading stuff. But so it was like my last call. I dialed out, and I would typically hit the enter key to kind of blow through all the junk that they would put up, right? And then at the bottom of the screen, it broke out. It said, "Hey, wait, stop hitting enter." And I thought for a minute, it surprised me and startled me, right? Because I'm a dyslexic person. I was a two-finger typist at the time, right? And the idea of communicating with someone typing, it was not comfortable for me, right? And so I thought maybe this was a little program that they put in there to stop me from doing that. So I hit enter, I kept hitting it, and then it did it again. It said, "Hey, stop, stop. I want to talk to you." I go, "Oh my God, it's a person." So I said, "Hi," so a couple fingers, and we had this like very brief conversation, but it's like, "Hi, where are you?" They were in San Francisco, and they were on the other side of the hill. And we just talked a little bit. It was raining, but then this person goes, it wasn't, "Do you like women's?" But ultimately got to a point where this person indicated through what they were saying that they were, was female. And she said, "Well, do you like women?" And I thought, "Oh, here we go." I thought, "Whoa, what kind of question is
I'm
that?" And I
married to
said,
one,
"Well,
you said.
yeah, yeah." I said, "Yeah, I like them so much. I married one." And she goes, "Where is she?" And I go, "Well, she's asleep, in the other room." And then, she ultimately asked, like, "Well, like, tell me what you like about women." And I thought, I mean, I tell you, man, as a 31-year-old man, um, heterosexual, this was incredibly titillating, right? I hung up the modem at that point, right? I just boom, I hit the F11 key and hung it up. And I swung back in that chair and I was tripping on the whole thing because not only was this conversation was this slow moving train, I mean, literally crawling because I was typing so slowly. And I remember thinking that this mode of communication was kind of useless, right? Because why wouldn't you send a fax? Why wouldn't you get on the phone and call? But those mediums don't allow your imagination to take over, right? Because as you're typing slow and you're putting together your response, your imagination is like going high speed and all of the options are there, in your head, and you're kind of working through typing out this little message, wondering where it's going. And it was incredible. And I thought, man, if I could package this and sell this, there's a business here. And I'm not talking about porn, I'm talking about I absolutely recognized that we were the content. I recognized that back in the day that, I remember 24-hour news came on, Ted Turner Network, CNN, people were, "What are they going to talk about for 24 hours?" And I go, "Look, there's a whole world out there. They can talk about a lot, and then as it started happening, I remember thinking about SFNet. It's like, why would someone want to talk to someone else? Like, why wouldn't they? People have ideas and there's opportunity. Opportunity only happens when you're talking with someone, right? Whether it's like now or whether you're typing it out. And so, the whole thing made sense to me that something like this could be very popular. And so in any case, I didn't, the chat thing, the technology wasn't there at the moment to do these multi-line chat things, right? This was a one-on-one, one computer to one computer. Going to that multi-line is a much more complicated affair. And that happened like 3 years later, I think. It was about 3 years. But in those 3 years, I created a couple of other companies. I created this thing called compact disc exchange where we would like, the whole idea is like, it's the 80-20 rule. Most of your music is the 20% that you really like. The 80% you hoped you'd like that CD, but that one song was good, but the rest of it's garbage. So the idea was that you would be able to sell that, those discs that you don't listen to much to someone who might like them. And there was we made $1.50 or something with every transaction. And it was an interesting, little business. We got some really good press from Billboard magazine, and that was kind of cool. But yeah, we were just, before our time, right? It was early, and making long distance calls to a database of CDs. Yeah, I just ultimately, we I think we probably sold 20 or 30 discs in this system. But what it did was it allowed me to convince my wife that we needed to spend this money on this kind of sophisticated bulletin board system software. And then now that I had the software, I had a couple of modems. The chat software appeared. It was commercial stuff, and I thought, well, there it is, and I bought it, and so we were off to the races. Didn't exactly know how we were going to do it all, but I knew we'd do it. And yeah, and so yeah, it was fun. Oh my God, it was just fun. No one knew the hell I was doing. I mean, my peers, but younger people, like this kid I mentioned in the book, Dave Laddie, my friend, and the guy who helped program some of the software. And these younger people, man, they were all over it. I mean, they could see it, and it was fun. Yeah, it was a good time.
We got 7 minutes before this Zoom finishes. We can do two things. We can cut here because we have to speak about faith. That's a word, not religious maybe, but this is a word that's next to you. It has been part of your life. You never said it, but you have faith. You're a faith guy.
Yeah,
You're a guy with a lot of faith because you believe in things. You believe in
yeah.
Bitcoin. You believed in El Sonte. You believed in San Francisco Net. You believed in modems and everything. And
Mhm.
all these things that, as I said, you've been restless. And restless people like you and me are people of faith. We have to
Yeah,
take risks. It's
we
in
are.
our nature. So we can do two things. Either we go ahead and I will cut here and I will send you another Zoom and I will do this edition stuff. I always do the edition stuff, anyways. So, and we do a second part, or we stay for another day and we can have another podcast, a second
Hey, we
one,
can have
on
another
another
podcast.
day.
I would love to talk about faith. And I mean, Faith is a guy who believed in himself, and that came from my parents, and that came from they're people of faith as well. We're Catholic. I man, I've gone on a journey. I swear, and I kind of famously joked that I was atheist here at one of the Bitcoin meetups. This was a few years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I had turned away from the church and God. I but oh my God, I am back on the faith wagon now. I just see so I told my son about 3 years ago, I said, Ben, I go, I feel like there's evil in the world is a highly organized enterprise, And he looked at me, he goes, Dad, he goes, I don't think so. And I go, well, I go, keep an ear to the rail, because and then all this Epstein file comes out and what our elected officials are doing with children and I just I turned away, like so many of the isms, feminism, transsexualism, atheism, and all this stuff comes from a place, it's these seeds are planted, just years and years ago, and they ultimately find hold in society, and the cancer, the rot starts, and I've recognized that. And my problem was I conflated God and the church, God in any church, right? I mean, God isn't the church and the church isn't God. And, God, churches are flawed man-made organizations, to the degree that they're going in the right direction. Let's keep our fingers crossed. But so in any case, yeah, it all kind of comes back to small communities and kind of where you get your strength from. And I participate in a small Catholic church here in El Zonte, and yeah, I really enjoy it. So anyway, there's a lot there. Kind of what I see here in El Salvador as opposed to what I see up in the States. And, there's this, I don't know if a myth, but people, talk about that, El Salvador's, the savior, and San Salvador is the glorious savior, Christ,
Mm.
and there are people that believe that this little country could save the world. And when I first heard that, 4 years ago, or I thought, how cute, that's a nice way to think about your country. But I'm not so sure that it's not, that it couldn't happen, that it isn't happening. And so anyway, it's a good place to be, and I'm glad I'm here.
Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to do this. We're going to get together for a second podcast. Maybe next week. You can have
Yeah,
time
sure.
next week. We can
I
do
got time.
for a second podcast because right now we're out of time, and I have to do some addition in this one, and I will send it to you, and then I will get it up at the YouTube and the channel. Okay, Wayne?
Very good. That sounds good. It's been a pleasure, Ernesto.
Be a real pleasure for me too. Okay, have a wonderful evening.
Adios, amigo.
Adios.